Welcome to NIOS live classes. Class 10th. Subject ISL Secondary number 230. Module number 2. Sign Language in Society. Lesson number 4. And the topic is the community of Indian Sign Language users, their commonalities and diversity. In this lesson, you will learn that there is a lot of variation in the deaf community, and they get exposure to sign language at different ages. Some children may be born to signing deaf parents and hence get a rich linguistic environment from the day one. Whereas some deaf children may get exposure to sign language quite late in their life. At the beginning, they don't know the sign language, the deaf culture, they were not aware about that. Similarly, there is a variation in sign language used by deaf people in urban and rural areas and among various geographical areas. In this chapter, you will also learn that apart from the deaf, there are some groups of hearing people who use Indian Sign Language. In ISL community, we can learn about various things. As you can see on the screen, at the first, we can also know about who are the members of this community, and the second, where do the members of this community live, and the third one is what are the commonalities and diversity of this community. Outcomes. After studying this lesson, learner will learn about various points. They can identify different subgroups of people in Indian Sign Language community. They can explain the size and the structure of this community also. They can also compare the situation of rural and urban sign language users and their sign language varieties in India. And also they can demonstrate an awareness of variation and diversity among Indian deaf communities. Now, the topic is different paths to sign language for deaf children. A deaf child born into a hearing community, or we can say non-signing family, so he or she will not get language input in their early life. They have to wait until they get enrolled in a deaf school or then start learning sign language. A child who has born in hearing or non-sign language family may grow up with oral language without any sign language input. And then he or she can join a deaf association as a young adult. Some deaf people are introduced to sign language later in life. The deaf children with deaf parents or other deaf relatives can learn sign language from the birth. They can also aware about the deaf culture and their language, their norms, ethics at the birth. And they can also learn sign language during their critical period. Now we will look about the structure and subgroups of the ISL community. Deaf signers. Within the deaf signing community in India, we have individuals who are from a deaf family with deaf parents or a deaf elder siblings. It is also possible that the family has a relative who are deaf or perhaps a neighbor who is deaf. The deaf child is exposed to sign language input from a very young age and become a native user of ISL. The second largest group of deaf signing individuals are those who have been profoundly deaf since birth or early childhood and have hearing or non-signing parents. They often join deaf schools and their strong visual skills ensure that they start picking up sign language quickly from the school environment. Another subset of people is born deaf and uses spoken language for the first few years of their lives until they lose their hearing. Their cognitive process for language functions are good and they can have near native fluency in sign language. There is yet another group of deaf signers who learn sign language later in their lives. They may join a deaf school late, or perhaps they are schooled orally and finally meet deaf people outside the school. then they start learning sign language as teenagers or young adult. But not all deaf people have the same experiences. Now we will look about the hearing signers, a hearing persons who use sign language. This group includes parents of deaf children. If the parents take sign language training and start using sign language for their child, so they will include in this group. Next, people at NGOs, colleges and other institutes linked with the Indian Sign Language community. And the next is CODAs, who has a deaf parents. The full form of CODAs you can see on the screen. They learn sign language as their first language and identify themselves as people with a deep deaf community connections. Or we talk about the interpreters. So some CODAs are also an interpreter, because at their critical age or their younger age they learn sign language from their parents, so after young they can work as an interpreter. Some friends and relatives, neighbors of a deaf person also develop near native fluency in Indian Sign Language. We have to keep in our mind that ISL community is large as diverse. Whether we talk about the CODAs, SODAs and etc. Let's take a short break.
जीवन ये प्रकाशित करने राहों को आलोकित करने, जीवन ये प्रकाशित करने राहों को आलोकित करने, हम अपना दीपक स्वयं बने, हम अपना रास्ता स्वयं चुने, हम अपना दीपक स्वयं बने, हम अपना रास्ता स्वयं चुने, जीवन ये प्रकाशित करने राहों को आलोकित करने। धन साधन समय की सीमा से विद्यालय जो मुक्त हो, धन साधन समय की सीमा से विद्यालय जो कभी पढ़े हम कहीं पढ़े वे विषय की लोच से युक्त हो, कभी पढ़े हम कहीं पढ़े वे विषय की लोच से युक्त हो। मित्रों हम उठे और जागे, मंजिल आने की ध्वनि सुने, हम अपना जीवन स्वयं बने, हम अपना रास्ता स्वयं चुने। जीवन ये प्रकाशित करने, राहों को आलोकित करने। राष्ट्रीय मुक्त विद्यालय का है द्वार खुला सबकी खातिर।
शिक्षा परीक्षा का अवसर एक बार ही क्यों मिलता फिर
शिक्षा और परीक्षा का अवसर एक बार ही क्यों मिलता फिर दुनिया में इसके केंद्र बहुत, कोई मन चाहा केंद्र चुने, हम अपना जीवन स्वयं बने, हम अपना रास्ता स्वयं चुने। कोई मन चाहा केंद्र चुने, हम
Welcome back to our classes. Now we will learn the topic is the number of ISL users. It is difficult to know that the exact number of ISL users. And why is it difficult? Since 2011, government has the responsibility to count the various groups. Like government has a responsibility to count the number of people in different groups. For example, men and women, Sikh, Isai, and etc. And the second group is the spoken language group, a people who has a spoken language, whether it is Tamil, Telugu, Hindi, English, etc. Along with it, they have the responsibility to count the person with disability. It also includes deaf persons. But it does not count the number of Indian Sign Language users. According to the census 2011, in India, the total deaf population in India is 50 lakh. Other estimates like India's National Association of the Deaf, they estimate that there are 18 million deaf peoples in India. It is observed that the number of sign language users in Western countries is decreasing. And why is it decreasing? Because they have advanced medical services. So it will help them to lower rate of deaf childbirth. And they also have a technology like early cochlear implant. So it helps deaf children to learn language at starting their birth. Furthermore, the deaf have only recently become more aware of their language rights, and technology has also enabled the deaf to communicate with one another via video call. European and Western countries, they have going down sign language users. Why is it going down? Because they have good early identification program, cochlear implant, and have a lower birth rate, and at last medical services, they have advanced medical services. But in India, sign language users are increasing day by day. And why is it increasing? Because in India, the identification program is newly started. And in India, there is a very few institutions and hospitals who provide cochlear implants. India has a higher birth rate, whether it is deaf or hearing. India's medical services is not high as much as Western's medical services. Use of Indian Sign Language to mobile phone. Now we will learn about the regional variation in India in ISL. As you can see, the word dialect, it means variation of a language linked to its location. Example, you can see on the flow chart. A group has a spoken languages and the other group has a sign languages. Spoken languages like Hindi, English, they have their own culture, and the sign language have their own culture. In India, every place have a same language? No, they have their own language and cultures. Regional variations do not pose communication challenges among deaf people. Research on regional variation in ISL is documented in the years given below by the various researchers. As you can see on the screen. The above research concluded that above 25% of the lexicon has regional differences. Next, mobility and digital communication and sharing platforms like YouTube changes the effect of regional differences in Indian Sign Language. Variation in language, culture and customs is beautiful and accepted. Now we will learn about the standardization of ISL. Let us first understand the process of language standardization. All languages in the world are split up into a number of dialects. Having dialect is the normal state of all languages. In addition, some languages have standard form. When a standard form of language develops or is created, this is called language standardization. Language standardization can happen as a natural process. And we may also see language policies and language planning for standardization. People have different views about language standardization. Some people support it for their language and some do not see it as necessary. In many cases, it is important to understand how language standardization can happen. So let us look at a few questions. Now the first question is, can we standardize a language by creating a dictionary? And the answer is no. Language standardization is not a product. Creating a language resource such as dictionary does not mean that we have a standardized language. Instead, language standardization is a process that takes time. It can take any time between one generation and hundreds of years for a language to evolve a standardized variety. Do dialects die out when a standard language has evolved? And the answer is again no. And why is it no? Because even after successful evolution of a standard variety, dialects do not automatically disappear. They usually continue to be used alongside the standard variety. Most people just become fluent in two language varieties, their own dialect and the standard variety. Is it enough to declare officially that a language has become standardized? And the answer is no. Because standardization of a language does not happen by simply declaring something to be a standard. When a standard variety evolves, the language community adopts new linguistic practices and habits to use the standard. Without the language community, top-down declarations have no effect. How can a language standardization actually happen? And the reason why the success of language standardization efforts depend on two important factors, which are same for the spoken language and sign language. First, speakers, or we can say signers of the language must have access to the standard variety. If people do not know what the standard form are, they cannot use them. People will use the standard form only if they see them frequently at school. Like in teaching materials, in stories, on television, and so on. The standard variety must be an actual existing variety, not an artificial collection without any natural users. And the second is, speaker or signers must have the motivation to use the standard variety. If people know the potential standard forms but do not want to use them, the standard will not spread. People may adopt forms as a standard if there are some role models, like at school, on television, on popular videos, and etc. If they have role models, so that they feel motivated to imitate the role models. Use of the variety. The more popular the material is that people can access, the more motivated they will be to adopt a potential standard variety. Without acceptance by the language community, standardization will not happen. This is because the living language of a community is made from millions of linguistic interactions between people that cannot be controlled. And acceptance can be improved by supporting the aspirations of the language community. For example, widespread access to quality materials in the language. Let's take a short break.
जीवन ये प्रकाशित करने राहों को आलोकित करने
जीवन ये प्रकाशित करने राहों को आलोकित करने हम अपना दीप दीपक स्वयं बने हम, अपना रास्ता स्वयं चुने हम। जीवन ये प्रकाशित करने, राहों को आलोकित करने।
धन साधन समय की सीमा से विद्यालय जो मुक्त हो, धन साधन समय की सीमा से विद्यालय जो मुक्त हो।
कभी पढ़े हम कहीं पढ़े, वे विषय की लोच से युक्त हो।
कभी पढ़े हम कहीं पढ़े, वे विषय की लोच से युक्त हो।
मित्रों हम उठे और जागे,
मंजिल आने की ध्वनि सुने हम, अपना दीपक स्वयं बने हम, अपना रास्ता स्वयं चुने।
जीवन ये प्रकाशित करने, राहों को आलोकित करने।
राष्ट्रीय मुक्त विद्यालय का है द्वार खुला सबकी खातिर। शिक्षा परीक्षा का अवसर एक बार ही क्यों मिलता फिर।
शिक्षा और परीक्षा का अवसर एक बार ही क्यों मिलता फिर। दुनिया में इसके केंद्र बात,
कोई मन चाहा केंद्र चुने हम, अपना दीपक स्वयं बने हम, अपना रास्ता स्वयं चुने। कोई मन चाहा केंद्र चुने हम,
Welcome back to our classes. We will learn about the standardization of sign language, comparing different situations. Standardization of sign language is connection with language policy, and it was done in the Netherlands. The deaf community and researchers put in years of efforts to document sign language of the Netherlands in the country. A standard form of sign language was linked to official recognition of the sign language. The Netherlands is a very small country with a small deaf population. But it has a language policy, so it will be easier to manage on a small scale. As far as Indian Sign Language is concerned, it currently has no official status, example as a scheduled language, and it insufficient official recognition, while the deaf community in India is very large with millions of sign language users. NEP National Education Policy 2020 recommends that the Indian Sign Language will be standardized across the country and national and state curriculum materials developed, and it will be developed for use by learners with hearing impairment. Indian Sign Language has no written form, so the spread of potential standard forms would have to happen through other media, notably via videos on television and the internet, as well as face-to-face communication. Dissemination of standard varieties in usually closely linked with formal education. However, most schools for the deaf in India are still not using Indian Sign Language for education, so they will not be able to support sign language standardization process. This can only happen when education through sign language becomes widely available. For the Indian deaf community, use of sign language in education, wide dissemination and availability of high quality materials in Indian Sign Language and official recognition of Indian Sign Language are matters of priority. Thank you.